Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with your producer, Michael, and today you are tuning into Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows, where I take a topic and I run with it. This year I have been doing topics around divination, and so to continue that, I'm going to be talking about intuition, which of course has more than an implication than just working with divination, but I thought it'd be a great topic following clairvoyance. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show, as Krista said. We've got some great stuff coming up. Next week we have an author, Brandy Williams, and she'll be talking about her book, The Woman Magician, so that should be a lot of fun, a lot of occult stuff this month. And then following that, we are going to be putting together our next 2-hour special, which will be on a Sunday the 13th, I believe. Where we're going to have a round table with our magical friends, similar to our paranormal ones. So we're going to have some witches and ceremonial magicians, and we're going to get into magic a little bit. So you guys can look forward to that. And then all kinds of other great stuff coming up. So check everything on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you want to donate a coffee on Ko-Fi, we appreciate that. Helps us cover our cost. And if not, we still love you and do this show for all of you guys. And you can sign up to our newsletter. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time because I know it's a short show this week. So I'm going to kick it back to you. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Really looking forward to next week's show. I'm excited to meet her. So the reason I chose intuition is, of course, it's a very commonly thrown around word. And from my point of view, I feel it's often underestimated and undervalued in the psychic tarot community, not so much the metaphysical community who you'll see deeply value intuition. It's, for whatever reason, it's not seen as glamorous as if you call yourself a clairvoyant or clairsentient or clairaudient. And I think it just has to do with the word itself and also probably the misrepresentation of the other psychic words that are used. I mean, misrepresenting meaning that some people, I think, don't know what they're saying when they use that words, but not obviously everybody. It could also be because it is considered, you'll see, it's considered to be a feminine trait, which, by the way, has nothing to do with gender, which is one of my beefs, is that the idea that for whatever reason women are more intuitive than men, I really don't think that's remotely true. I think there is sometimes a mother's instinct that is, I think, in mothers, particularly when, they're very close to their children, but I think it's an incredible ability, but I think that's a separate thing, and we'll talk about why, and you'll see by the definition of intuition why I think that too. It's a very mystical, ineffable, and as I said, anybody can have intuition or develop it. So I wanted to throw out a few definitions from other people first because I thought they were, pretty cool. This one's very succinct, and it's from Theosophy World. It says that intuition is the direct or immediate perception or awareness without rational thought of a truth or situation. And I'm going to come back to a little bit more of the theosophical view because it's very interesting. And then I went to Heart Math Institute because I remember going there doing some research, and they actually have some research on intuition. And their definition briefly was, quote, the ability to understand or know something without conscious reasoning. So you can see it's very similar to the theosophical definition, but they definitely go into some different dimensions, both these groups, which I'll touch base later on. And then more poetically, I happen to find a YouTube channel where they just have clips that the fella just has, they have clips of Terence McKenna talking. And I've been in this world for so long, the metaphysical world, and I've never read any of his books or listened to him, but it was about intuition, so I thought I would. And at the very beginning, Terence McKenna says, quote, "Intuition is a feeling into things that comes to answers and leaves no trail." I loved that. I thought it was such a beautiful, poetic view of intuition. And I said, oh, I can see why people like Terence McKenna. And I went on to listen to more about that topic, which sometimes kind of went into some other things. But he has a very, really interesting mind. And again, I'll talk a little more about some of his other thoughts about intuition. And the fourth definition I wanted to give you, because I like Rudolf Steiner, I found was this quote, "Intuition is for thinking what observation is for perception, and intuition and observation are sources of knowledge." So as you can see, there's many people throughout time have really deeply valued intuition. And again, we'll mention a few of those along the way too. But what it is not, and this is what I think too, the theosophical people say it isn't connected to extrasensory perception. It's not the same, and it's not the same as a gut feeling. And on my own, I have a decent connection to intuition and to my gut feeling. And for me, it's always been a different mechanism. My gut feeling has saved me several times from really sort of potentially harmful situations. I just felt like in my gut, I shouldn't turn down that road, or I need to get in my car, or so I've had a couple of experiences with that. I think it's a kind of primal thing that preserves us. And I think that intuition, as we go through the program a little bit more today, you'll see my view of it is it's not even simply about feeling things. I believe it's some form of integration of the mind, especially the reasoning mind, and the feeling mind. And I think it's a process that develops naturally if a person is practicing a spiritual practice. And yes, and some people maybe have some natural intuition when they're young, and if they are lucky, they just kind of keep it open. But it's certainly something that you can develop. So that's a little bit of my thoughts. I also wanted to say a little bit about what I found out when I was doing a little research. I always like to see what the theosophical world thinks about these days. I think I was involved in theosophy when I was in another lifetime, because I haven't been in this lifetime. And I often agree with whatever they're saying. I'm like, oh, that's really pretty cool. So in the theosophy world, intuition, besides the definition I just gave you, it also said the people that edited that were Vicente Chin and Richard Brooks. They wrote that intuition more commonly denotes an integrative, I can't read my own writing today, integrative capacity to see things in their large totalities. It also plays a central role in spiritual development and is in fact often identified as a spiritual faculty itself. So I like that idea that it has to do with being able to see the bigger picture, to integrate, because that's to me how I feel intuition is when it's operating correctly in me. It's as if I can see a bigger picture, a bigger perspective, or something very clear and very truthful. And then that idea that it plays such a central role in spiritual development, this is very common if you read like in the yoga text, or you read other sort of metaphysical views, that in some, I remember reading a long time ago in one of Alice Bailey's book, I only barely got into the book because she was a little difficult to read. She talked about intuition being the stronger ability of all abilities. And from what I remember was that she was saying that intuition has this direct connection to God or to the source, whereas psychic abilities, generally speaking, fall in the astral plane, except if you go back and look at my previous shows on clairvoyant, there are forms of clairvoyance that rise into the higher planes. But intuition seems to not register there. It seems to naturally be already connected in Theosophy would say to the Buddhic plane. And they also associate intuition with wisdom and insight in Buddhism, which I thought was interesting because I've never really thought of intuition along with wisdom. But when you think of one's experiences with intuition, at least my own, which I'll share a few a little bit later on, it makes a lot of sense. And they also said that it's a faculty, like I said, it's connected to the Buddhic consciousness. So you're not going to be really tapping into the astral world, which is often misleading, where if you get your psychic information from there, sometimes it can be a symbol, sometimes it's something literal. So it gets to be a little bit complicated. Now, as I said earlier, I touched base with Terence McKenna's very beautiful poetic view of intuition. And then he went on to say something really interesting about intuition. Couple things first. First, he made a corollary to Taoism, and he called it intuitionism. And I loved that idea that intuition is like the Tao. It has that same, mystery and femininity and the idea of surrender. And then he talked about mathematics. Now, this is something that really I'd never thought about and surprised me. But he said that 50% of mathematicians would agree with him that it is connected, let me get his quote, that mathematics itself, 50% of it is based on intuition. And he goes on to give an example of like how you start with sort of an idea and then you have to go and prove it somehow. So that form of mathematics. And then he also talked about in this one video recording that mathematics has an uncanny ability to describe nature. And we all know that with the way numbers are and the different patterns in roses and flowers, the repetition of patterns. So I thought that was really interesting that math itself is based on intuition. And he also argued that science kind of stole math away and claimed it to be part more scientific than it really is. And so it's a really unusual look at not only intuition and math and in this one talk that he gave on intuition. So I like that a lot. Next one I wanted to sort of illuminate more on was the heart math experiment that I mentioned a little earlier. And I sort of agree with their results and I sort of don't, but I think it's really fascinating that they actually do scientific studies of intuition. Like they do, really, really thorough ones. And if you go to their website, they also talk about 3 types of intuition, which you may or may not agree with, but I think it was really fascinating. And one is implicit knowledge. The other is energetic sensitivity, and then non-local intuition. So implicit knowledge is kind of like what it sounds like, where somewhere along the line you heard something and you just didn't remember it consciously, so subconsciously it kind of comes back. And so that's the implicit knowledge intuition. And energetic sensitivity is just like it sounds too, how you kind of pick up on the vibes of things. And there is an element of vibration, I think, connected to intuition, which I know through the whale medicine. So we'll talk about that a bit if we have some time. And non-local intuition, what they call non-local intuition, the heart math, I think seems more psychic to me because it's like that idea of you knowing something from a distance. And to me, that is, we talked about this in my clairvoyant shows, that's what clairvoyance is. So again, you get in a little into, the words representing these powers maybe are sort of bleeding together. And I feel like on one level, maybe it doesn't matter, but on the other level, maybe we should sort of maybe have some agreements of the words. And I do think that intuition is related to clairvoyance in some ways, but I think it's different. So personally, I'm not sure about the non-local intuition. So anyway, what they did as an experiment, which was interesting because they actually study the body, which I find fascinating. And they built on Dr. Dean Radin's experiment, and he is a senior scientist, or was at least at the time, of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And he did this experiment where the study participants, they studied the automatic nervous systems of these people looking at these images, different kinds of images. Some were shocking, some were calming, and they wanted to see what would happen. And basically they were reacting, the nervous system was reacting before they saw the images, and either negative or positive. And so then the Heart Math Institute, they also added to this studying of the nervous system. They measured brain waves, EKGs, and heart rate variabilities. They found that in their experiments, and not necessarily Dr. Radin's because he didn't add that, that the heart received the information before the brain. Just very, not much difference, but it was significant enough to notice it. So they feel like, based on that, or they think based on the studies, not just feel, that the heart is a significant part of intuition. And that is one of the things that they sort of promote a lot, is sort of the idea of listening to one's heart, but it's also has a physiological connection to intuition. So I thought about that. And one of the things I was wondering is if it's not so much that intuition starts at the heart, but that it's basically where, if you look at the Kundalini or the chakra system, you have the lower chakras where the Kundalini rises, and you have the upper chakras where things are coming down. And this is based on sort of some tantric knowledge, and they meet at the heart. And so one of the things that when you're doing the tantric practices, you're trying to get the upper and lower energies to meet at the heart. And so to me, I think it's the heart maybe is just where everything meets. And so that it's not really necessarily originating, it's at the fourth chakra, roughly speaking. And that's just from my own thoughts, and also from some of the things I know about the inner workings of the body. So the other thing I wanted to mention was that, for whatever reason, I mean, I didn't do a deep dive into some of the definitions, but it does seem like there's this sort of missing piece with the reasoning mind being part of intuition. And maybe to some degree, maybe it is suggested by the fact that one of the obstacles to intuition are if you're really super emotional, if you're very self-absorbed, if you have prejudices. This is what Theosophy says. If you have a lot of prejudices against other people and conditioned emotional reactions, then these can muddy the intuition. So it makes sense to me, if you develop your reasoning mind, that intuition has a clearer vehicle to work with. So even if you're not directly using reason, you are including it sort of indirectly. So I feel that my own feelings of and experiences of intuition, my intuition is much stronger when my mind is calmer and clearer and is more balanced. And it's ironic that like two of the most famous people that really valued intuition was Tesla and Einstein. And there's some, you can find all kinds of quotes about it online, but they were both really brilliant and intellectual. So maybe they just took it for granted because they were really smart. So I don't think you have to be a genius per se, but I do believe it's important to develop our intelligence, however that looks, in order to fine tune our intuition. The other thing that sometimes people mention is, I have intuition and I don't trust it, and how do I learn to trust it? And there's some people say it's a self-esteem issue, which can be true because one of the animal totems associated with intuition and self-esteem is moose. And with the moose, you have to learn to have a balanced self-esteem, and your intuition is very strong with the moose. However, I think it's also a matter of courage. And I think Terence McKenna got me thinking about courage in this video on intuition. And he talks about how nature likes courage. and that when you really do something courageous that is connected to your hopes and dreams, that the universe will run up to meet you, sort of. Not sort of, but really will. And I thought about it, I said, well, he's absolutely right. And when I've done that in my life, when I've taken a huge step forward to something I really wanted, I have to admit that's the most powerful magic I usually get back. And so I think courage, a lot of times it's not so much about people not being in touch with intuition or not trusting it. It's having the courage to actually use it, because now and then it really does ask you to do something that will make you really uncomfortable, your ego uncomfortable. So that's part, to me, of anything that helps develop your courage separately can help you with your intuition. And of course, that makes sense too, because fear can block us if we allow it to dominate our minds. And it's not so much, again, that you won't feel your intuition. You're just not going to act on it. So that's my thought too. And then, as I mentioned, there are some animal totems that I know that are both connected to intuition. And it's interesting because I can see why they are now. So as I said, the moose is related to the self-esteem and balancing your self-esteem, and also has a warrior aspect and learning when to fight, when not to fight, being the old warrior, so to speak. And one of the reasons they say that the moose has intuition is because the calves, when they are born, their eyes are wide open. And the intuition of the moose is incredibly subtle. There is, as I said earlier, there's one of the things about intuition is that it may not have any sensation to it. It may not have, sometimes it can, but it can just feel like a knowing, a deep knowing. And it can just kind of come inside of you and you're wondering where it's from. And I've had that happen to me with little things even. And I've learned to trust it, but at first, because there was nothing glamorous about it, I did not trust it. I didn't think it was important. So that's one of the totems. Another one is the whale. In mythology, the whale is considered, at least by some of the indigenous cultures, the whale is considered to carry all of the records of history. And so it's called the record keeper. And the whale is associated, of course, with the water, which is a very spiritual energy. It's also associated with song because of the whales that can sing and the way they communicate, and ancestry. And some people see the whales connect to the Akashic records because of the carrying of all the records. And if the whale ever dies, then we would all die because it's carrying everything, all the records of our history together. So vibration. So one of the things when you work with the whale is if you work with vibration through singing, chanting, toning, that will often kind of clear your energy easily, so that seems to be, so again, that idea of creating that space so that you can feel the intuitiveness. And yes, I do think that there is a very powerful feeling aspect to intuition. I think, however, people confuse emotions with feeling. And I also, from my own experience, for the most part, intuition has a feeling of some, it seems different to me. It feels more refined. It doesn't have a buzz in it. I have also really strong instincts sometimes. I've had gut feelings. I have moments of clairvoyance, but really not consistently, so I could never call myself a clairvoyant. And intuition is hard for me to describe because it's sort of something that kind of comes in me and through me and can be quite quiet. So I feel like one of the easiest ways to, if you want to uncover your intuition, is by a spiritual practice. And I think that there's probably levels of intuition and what it can do because of the concept of it being connected to wisdom, that there are things intuition can do besides tell you, things to help people in a reading. But I also found it really telling that in order to really open up your intuition, you can't be self-absorbed. And it's about thinking about others. So it makes sense to me, like, let's say you're a person that's just a super kind-hearted person and you really care about people and you're you're really thinking about other people, not for some kind of self-gain, or maybe it's animals that you really love. And then you find that you have this knack or ability to see things that other people can't. That makes a lot of sense to me. That's probably one of the most straightforward ways spiritually to grow, is by helping others in a way that where you let go of any sort of hope of recognition. And I always think of all those people that rescue animals, and once in a while you'll see them in the news, but meanwhile they've been rescuing like bats for 20 years, and it's very hard work and very difficult, and often there's no money even for the bats, and yet they love it. You can see, if you go on some of these now, we can see the videos, you can see how much people love doing it. And I feel like, I bet a lot of those people are very intuitive people, and they're just because they're so generous with their time and their energy. So for me, I had something recently that was sort of an intuitive thing that happened, and this is maybe how it happens for me in an ordinary way. Is I had set some time aside last week, and I thought it was going to be to finish this article I really wanted to work on. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do any readings. I'm going to say no to everybody, and I'm going to set these 2 days aside. And I kept feeling like I really have to do this. And it wasn't really a urgent thing. I just said, I'm going to do this. And I literally had to turn away 3 or 4 people that wanted readings. And then it turns out that the universe had something else they wanted me to do with those 2 days. And that was my husband brought home a young crow, and we ended up, helping it just for a couple days. And so luckily I'd set aside the time, because it can be a little time consuming when you're not sure if the crow is injured and you want to make sure it's safe and you got to find food. So I remember thinking, like, I'm glad I listened to my intuition, because I wasn't stressed out about that. I had time, we had the energy, and it was fine. So instead of trying to squeeze it in. So sometimes, your intuition, one of the things I like about intuition, it doesn't tell you why sometimes you should do something. It just, you find out by following it and by doing it. And I also have found personally my intuitions sometimes just will be like sort of like a little notion, and then sometimes I will get more information about something. And I feel like with intuition, I will get the information I need to get, whether it's to help myself or someone else. And that's all I need to know. I don't need to know everything. It's just enough to do whatever the intuitive part of me wants me to do. So that's been my experience with intuition. And I feel like it has grown. I think it's one of those things that, just like clairvoyance, it can grow a lot. And it can be, I think we all have it. And I think it's just a matter of wanting to see it and use it. And that's the other thing is it's very important to use it, even if it's flawed, even if it's, let's say it's not clear yet, and you make some errors according to what you think. And Blavatsky says that you have to go ahead and practice. It's like anything else. And so don't be afraid to, follow what you thought was your intuition, and maybe it was not a fully, I guess, like pure intuition. Maybe like it was clouded by something. Usually people cloud it with interpretation. So they'll think, oh, I need to stay home because of these reasons. So that's one of the common mistakes I find with intuition. And you certainly can use it in readings. I think it is equal to clairvoyance, and in some ways I personally think it can be superior to clairvoyance, because I feel it's just a natural part of the human being, and not everyone seems to become clairvoyant, but I think we can all be intuitive. So I'd like to encourage you all to think about it and to explore your own intuition. And if you have any thoughts or questions, just please send me an email. I'll be happy to share any more information, because it's one of my favorite tools that I like to use. And I think it, as I said earlier, sometimes it's overlooked because it doesn't sound quite as glamorous. So thank you for listening in. I hope you have a most beautiful week. I look forward to seeing you next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together.